73-mile-long structure was 12 feet thick and stood 15 feet high.
One of the most interesting constructions in ancient Britain is Hadrian's Wall. They were trying to keep out the invading tribes coming down from Scotland. Tribes were part of a confederation called the Picts, and these people were remarkable warriors. They painted themselves blue, tattoos all over their bodies, and they would attack their enemies naked, fearless. Even up to the 4th century AD, they were still coming over the wall, and virtually they kind of drove the Romans out of Britain.
Scotland has maintained its reputation as a fiercely independent nation throughout its history, with heroes like William Wallace and Robert the Bruce and their legendary battles for Scotland's independence from English rule. And just as unique and volatile as Scotland's history is its landscape.
There is something geologically special about Scotland. It's visible with the naked eye when you drive through the Highlands, when you drive through the Scottish mountains and you see the grandeur of the place. It's obvious when you come to understand how much volcanic activity there was in Scotland, how many extinct volcanoes there are all over Scotland, that there is a very specific and powerful fault structure and system across Scotland. There are just some places in the world where the earth itself is powerful, and Scotland is at the very, very top of this list.
Scotland is really overlooked geologically in terms of its seismic activity. To have greater than a magnitude 5 earthquake is pretty common. If you look at what we call the structure of Scotland, it's a structure or an amalgamation of tectonic activities going back hundreds of millions of years that have really pieced together this island, and it's still very active. These are deep crustal faults. So when you consider the whole configuration of it, it's a very, very energetically dynamic place.
Scotland's energetic landscape is of interest not only to geologists, but also to ancient astronaut theorists, because they believe it could have a connection to another defining characteristic of Scotland, its unusually high number of unidentified aerial phenomena.
Scotland as a nation, as a country, has been touched by the UFO presence. I've travelled the length and breadth of Scotland to look and investigate these cases properly. The earliest known sighting reported in Scotland was at the Roman conquest of Great Britain in AD 80. A number of soldiers saw what they described as a flying shield in the skies above mid-Scotland.
There's a very interesting correlation between UFO sightings and earthquakes and other underground activity. In fact, there are numerous places around the world where portals are talked about. Natives speak of these portals that are also sites where there's this seismic activity. You think of places like the Big Island in Hawaii, Carnac stones in France, and also Mount Shasta. You think of Mount Adams in southern Washington, where for centuries we've been told about this place as being a gateway into the inner earth. It's actually a dormant volcano. These are all places the natives or the locals speak of UFO activity, portal activity, and there also happen to be sites where there's extreme seismic activity as well. In Scotland, they have exactly the same thing involving UFOs and paranormal phenomena.
So many high-profile UFO cases and other mysteries are centred on Scotland. And Scotland may be at the heart of a lot of things which might help us unlock this mystery.
Could it be that among the mist-shrouded mountain peaks and boggy moorlands of Scotland lurks an otherworldly presence? One that has been around for thousands of years? Perhaps other clues can be found by examining a small town in Scotland known to be one of the most active UFO hotspots on Earth. Central Scotland. Situated between Glasgow and Edinburgh lies a mysterious region famous among UFO researchers as the Falkirk Triangle. Centered around the small village of Bonnybridge, it boasts the highest concentration of UFO sightings on Earth.
The Falkirk Triangle is a hot spot not only in the UK but in the world for UFO sighting. It's located out of the way, there's no major cities in the way, so it's got beautiful clear skies at night and a huge lack of light pollution given the high number of reported sightings.
The volume of UFO reports that come within the Falkirk Triangle in Scotland compared to the population of these areas is astronomical. It immediately shoots it up to being one of the biggest UFO hotspots in the world.
You have to say to yourself, what is it that's going on in this area? Why is this area so special?
Since 1992, approximately 300 UFO sightings are reported every year in the Falkirk Triangle. And for the past 30 years, this extraordinary statistic has been documented in recorded images captured by local residents.
Not only do we have witness testimony coming from the Falkirk Triangle, we also have video footage as well. There's a gentleman by the name of Craig Malcolm. He's a local person in the Bonnybridge area. And he has taken a number of footage of strange alien objects in the sky.
The very first one was the early 90s, a ball of light in the sky, and it was like rotating, a figure of 8 going across the top of the building. And that was what kind of got the whole thing started. I started the video on it because I wanted to get nuts and bolts proof that there was something out there to prove to people that I wasn't being silly.
Over the years, Craig has filmed an unprecedented 18 hours of UFO footage, much from his own backyard in Bonnybridge. And neighbors like Stephen Bird have captured additional footage.
Stephen Bird was on the Oakhill Hills, which overlooks Bonnybridge. He was taking a panoramic view on his camera, and he was astounded to see this black object on screen, and then it just disappeared. And this is the weight of evidence that we have. And this is why video photography is so important to back up witness testimony.
While most people cite 1992 as the year the Falkirk Triangle became a UFO hotspot, locals say that mysterious encounters have been happening in the area far longer. And as evidence, point to one of the most famous UFO incidents in Scottish history. Deckman, Scotland, November 9th, 1979. In the center of the Falkirk Triangle, just 20 miles from Bonnybridge, Forest Service Supervisor Bob Taylor walks down a wooded path when he sees something extraordinary in the clearing ahead. A huge object hovering above the forest floor.
What Bob Taylor came across was a physical object, one that appeared to be disc-like in appearance, but it would seem to have these very odd propellers.
He's never seen anything like this in his life. And then the object started to disappear. And it would re-solidify, de-solidify. And as if this subject couldn't get any more bizarre, it did. Because what happened was, what resembled two Second World War seamen descended from beneath this objective, started rolling across the grass towards him. Then suddenly this object stopped in front of him and projected these projections towards this person. They grabbed him forcibly at the hips. When he regained consciousness, he had a nasty graze in his chin, he had a graze in his head, his clothes were all torn, his jersey was muddy, he felt nauseous and a terrible headache.
Taylor managed to stagger the mile and a half back to his home and called the police. As a result, incident remains one of the only UFO encounters in history to be officially investigated as a criminal matter. The case was also taken up by young UFO investigators Malcolm Robinson and Andrew Collins, who were all just 22 years old.
Welcome to Deadwood Woods.
Now, they are returning to the scene with researcher Hugh Millman in search of new evidence that could shed light on the 44-year-old mystery.
Well, that's a proper plinth. Wow, marking the spot.
Well, basically, we erected this plaque because there were people travelling from all over the world to try and find this location, and they couldn't generally find it.
Was it just right here? That's where it was?
It was indeed. And he was standing where that log is there. And the object he saw was probably about head height, about 6 to 7 feet above the surface of the grass. And there were over 20 police officers here at this site behind me where a full criminal investigation was undertaken because it was an assault by persons unknown. They were gobsmacked by what they had.
And then you put the word out to the UFO community, and this is where everyone got bothered. I mean, I came straight up here immediately because we realised just how significant this case was. And there I met Malcolm for the first time. That being 40 years ago, almost to the day now.
Yes.
There were still a load of people here that were still combing the area, investigating it, and we saw the marks on the ground. The marks were in a circular arrangement, and there was no way that these were caused by some kind of mundane event such as horses passing through. Yeah, these were very clearly heavy-duty marks right into the ground.
Bob Taylor's account stands apart from many others due to the abundance of physical evidence, including the trousers he was wearing, which he claimed were torn by the objects that tried to pull him into the ground.
These are the actual trousers that Bob Taylor wore on that day. Now, as you can see, that's quite a consistent tear.
They are proper thick, aren't they?
Yes.
Well, look at these. That is unusual. You can see the way it's been cut accurately. It's not just like a random branch or a stone cutting it if you fall over. There's something else going on here.
What we have to bear in mind is the testimony from the police forensic scientist, Lester Knibb, who did say that these tears were made in an upwards mechanical manner. They were not caused by any forest debris, sharp stones or twigs. And they are heavy duty material, so it takes a considerable punch in and a pull up to make tears of this magnitude. Very, very bizarre.
This doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Does Bob Taylor's extraordinary encounter, supported by physical evidence and a large-scale police investigation, provide the ultimate evidence of an extraterrestrial presence in the Falkirk Triangle? And if so, is some mysterious force attracting alien visitors to this particular location on Earth? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and suggest that further evidence can be found not by looking to the skies above Scotland, but by examining the Earth beneath it. Bonnybridge, Scotland, 1992. Billy Buchanan is elected to represent Bonnybridge and the neighboring town of Arley on the Falkirk Area Council. It is the same year that hundreds of UFOs begin to be witnessed in the region known as the Falkirk Triangle, and the locals come to Councilman Buchanan in droves to report their strange encounters.
There have been thousands that came to me saying that they've seen strange things in the sky that weren't what you could say conventional aircraft. And I had to try and give them an answer, as I'm still trying and being unsuccessful. Because all we've had as answers is that the Ministry of Defence said that there is nothing happening above the skies in Bonnybridge that is a threat to national security. So that means that either everybody in this area is talking a lot of rubbish, or else they know exactly what's going on.
And he was calling
for a public inquiry. And I think Billy came to view me as one of the bad guys here because his central allegation was that the Ministry of Defence knew all about this and was covering it up. And, you know, I don't like to fall back on the Nuremberg defence, but this was my job to play down the phenomenon. But Billy and the people of Weybridge, I apologise. There's something going on in the Falkirk Triangle.
What could explain why this area of Scotland experiences even more UFO sightings than the rest of the country? Curiously, geologists have found that the seismic pressure beneath the Falkirk Triangle is particularly intense.
When you look at that triangular area, there's a break in seismicity. And we call that break a seismic gap. If you live in a seismic gap, it's actually more prone to have a next big earthquake because it's locked. You know, pressures are being put on it in what we call the in situ stresses. We see the Falkirk Triangle falls into one of these seismic gaps, and I think that's very, very relevant to the story here.
Some researchers have theorized that aerial phenomena witnessed throughout Scotland is connected not only to seismic activity, but also the country's geological makeup.
A lot of the country is made up of igneous rocks that were produced by volcanoes across many millions of years. And this creates an intense type of geology involving certain types of minerals such as quartz and tourmaline, which generates electricity. So is it possible that the presence of this incredibly intense geology here is producing a portal into another realm or another place in space and time, or indeed perhaps even a higher dimensional reality?
Could the geology and seismic activity in Scotland be creating exotic energy that attracts extraterrestrial visitors? Or even opens portals to other realms? Curiously, a major fault line runs directly through one of the most famous sites in Scotland, Loch Ness.
One of the most intense geological areas is Loch Ness, because passing along the entire length of the loch, immediately beneath it is the Great Glen Fault Line.
The rock walls of the chasm that exists in Loch Ness contain a high concentration of quartz, which is known to be an efficient conductor of electricity. Some researchers have suggested that quartz, coupled with the narrowness and depth of Loch Ness, creates a perfect storm of highly charged electromagnetism that could generate portals in space-time through a process called the Casimir effect.
The idea is, I take two metal plates and stick them in the vacuum of space. It turns out, because of quantum fluctuations, this creates an effective attractive force between the plates. One can think of this as a negative energy. Now, an intriguing idea that we get is that this is exactly the principle we need to understand perhaps how to stabilize a wormhole.
Perhaps Loch Ness creates a window into the past. And so what if, because of the Casimir effect, which at Loch Ness is a physical possibility, a window in time opened and the Loch Ness Monster is witnessed essentially almost by coincidence?
Could it be that those who witness the Loch Ness Monster are actually looking through a window in time? Or is it even possible that Nessie is an alien entity that is able to pass through a wormhole that exists at Loch Ness?
If it was only Nessie, then we could ignore this as perhaps being a clue to understanding the greater importance of Scotland. But it's not, because what we also find is that UFOs are regularly seen, either above the loch, on the shores of the loch. Sometimes they fly down the length of the loch. We have Bigfoot on the shores of Loch Ness. We have fairy encounters in the modern day. So is this underlying geological fault producing the right type of environment to allow the manifestation of UFOs?
Is it possible that the geology and seismic activity in Scotland creates an energetic environment that attracts extraterrestrial visitors, or even opens portals to other realms? Perhaps further clues can be found by examining another of Scotland's many mysteries, the ancient stone circles. For more than 2,000 years, Scotland has maintained a connection to its ancient Celtic traditions of little people and fairy folk. According to legend, these magical beings inhabit stone circles and standing stones across the country, and sometimes even abduct humans into their realm. Most scholars regard such Celtic mythology as purely fictional. But to many Scots and other descendants of the Celtic people, stories of fairies and other non-human entities are anything but fantasy.
In Scotland, there's been all sorts of stories dating back through the lore of fairies, and there'll always be a grandparent to say, actually, I remember when I was a child, I saw these fairies at the bottom of the garden. People saw something that they couldn't understand, maybe non-human entities.
Scotland's fairy folk are often associated with its rich trove of stone circles that date back more than 4,000 years. Legends have persisted for centuries that these sites attract otherworldly entities and serve as portals to other dimensions.
Scotland does have a lot of stone circles, and some of them are similar somewhat to Stonehenge in that they are upright stones of varying size and heights, and typically the layout seems to correlate with the summer and winter solstices and the equinoxes. Knowing the changing of the seasons is really important because you need to plan your agriculture around it, you need to plan your herding around it, and some people think the stone circles might have a hidden meaning that speak of a higher connection to something.
One of the first researchers to document the strange happenings witnessed near Scotland's ancient standing stones was a 17th century Episcopalian minister in the Scottish Highlands named Robert Kirk.
Robert Kirk made it his life's work to document supernatural activity around Scotland, and he created a volume called The Secret Commonwealth. And Kirk really focused on the idea that the fairy folk were guardians of portal areas. There were places in Scotland where you could slip in and out of different dimensions.
The accounts Kirk documented came from his parishioners' many striking stories about elves, fairies, wraiths, and other mysterious beings. Kirk believed these stories constituted strong evidence that another world exists parallel to our own.
The fascinating thing about Robert Kirk is right before he published The Secret Commonwealth, he died and his body disappeared. And it's believed to this day that he was taken by the fairy folk into another dimension through one of the very portals that he was writing about.
Could it be that the fairy folk described in Scottish folklore truly exist? According to some researchers, the fairy sightings reported at stone circles may be connected to the modern-day UFO phenomenon.
In the folklore of Scotland, the fairies became the inhabitants of the stone circles. So how can we relate this to the UFO phenomena? Well, we can in the sense that we know that these monuments are associated with the appearance of mysterious lights. This is found not just in Britain, but also across the world. In other words, it's very obvious that our ancestors built these monuments where mysterious lights would appear on a regular basis.